Generative music is any music where a part of the compositional process is delegated to an agent other than the composer themselves. So this could be a computer, where the composer would program an algorithm, which is a set of instructions or a process given to the computer to carry out a particular part of the compositional process. But the agent could well be another human being. It could be any system capable of providing an output, so it doesn't have to be a computer. This film explores generative music, starting with computer-based algorithmic composition, and then exploring to the very edges of this genre.
I'm Marcin Pietruszewski. I'm a composer and researcher based at Edinburgh University. So the way I use algorithms is to kind of to generate new material, to transform some material I've already generated, and to generate different forms and rules of organizing this material and transformations. But at the same time, I'm not kind of bound to the result of algorithm. For me, it's a way of, on one hand, to generate something unpredictable, in a sense, something I wouldn't be able to imagine. And this sort of scenario is very experimental in the sense that I employ certain algorithm or certain rule. I listen to the result, and then I decide whether the result is, satisfies me, and I can use this to within the music piece. On the other hand, is a way of it's a economy of composing. When I observe certain actions, when I compose and I observe that certain actions are being repeated, that I do certain things repeatedly, then I decide to automate it. So there is a big deal of freedom and intuition-based approach in my composing, where I freely move between kind of purely formalized, rule-based approach and kind of more intuition-based techniques. Yeah. Like my background is free improvisation, so I kind of have this natural urge of doing things live, generating things live, and experimenting in front of the audience. Another thing which I'm interested in when it comes to perform computer music is to kind of redefine or redefinition of the performance space. I rarely perform on stage. I don't really like it, purely because I don't think there is much to look at when I'm interacting with the computer. There's always this expectation from the audience that if you are seated in front of the stage and there's someone on the stage, you're waiting for something to happen, and I kind of like to change this expectation. So quite often I'm not visible, so I sit somewhere on the side or backstage, or I sit in the middle with our audience surrounding me, so then people have chance to see what I do on my screen. So I think that's what's interesting with computer music and algorithmic music, is the fact that it's not only redefinition of the way you compose, and it doesn't only bring new material to the kind of musical realm, but it redefines the way you present that music as well.
Hello.
Hiya.
Hey man. So I'm used to doing fixed media most of the time, you know. So, but what frustrated me was the lack of kind of intuitive control. So I come from just like I play guitar. That's my background, like, you know. So, the lack of physicality in kind of making tape music kind of annoyed me. So then I ended up just kind of investigating things like the leap motion sensor and things like that. And then I came across the Xbox, and I found that I could conjure up kind of more, I don't know, just I could marry the physical with the musical gesture, you know, a lot better in terms of composition and performance by using the Xbox. So I was messing around with that, and then I discovered that while it was powerful, you have to be very clever in how you set up your system. Otherwise, you have sounds happening all the time, so that's where I guess the kind of the algorithmic end comes into it.
How does it feel to perform a piece like that?
It's great. Like, I love being on stage. I used to play in bands all the time, and that's something that I really miss with the tape music. It's just the capacity of being able to express your music through like your facial expressions and your bodily movements and stuff like that. So it feels great. It's it's invigorating. So it is, and there's also the tension of like, oh, will it work? Won't it work? Because technology is a cruel mistress, and I think that plays slightly to it's one of the strengths of these performances is that people realize that, or maybe they don't realize, but I feel that anyway, that this could break at any moment, and that tension it kind of gives you those nerves, I guess, kind of spur you on to kind of perform with a bit more with a bit more, I don't know what the word would be. I don't know, you're on the edge basically, like, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it feels great to perform, and I think that's really where my one of my great loves is the performance of music, you know. And in general, I think that can be lacking in electroacoustic music, where you just don't have the performer's gestures when someone is behind the mixing desk. There's plenty of interesting instruments that people do use, but in general, you know, I can't get the same connection with a performer if they're sitting behind a keyboard triggering stuff as I would with a drummer who's really just slamming the kit, like, you know.
I play the drums.
Yeah, I play the sitar.
I play the synths and whatever comes in my way.
So Hans, as well as being the band name, is also the name of the AI, the program. Does it actually stand for anything?
It stands for something.
We have an acronym for it, that human-like audio network system.
Cool. And what is it that what's Hans's role within the band?
He's like a sampler guy. He plays some crazy samples according to some neurofuzzy system. He does it more or less well.
The neuro system tried to model the way how our brain works with the little neurons, while the fuzzy part is based on probability. So that doesn't say if you reach this limit with the input, which, for example, the frequency. So when you reach a limit, it doesn't say, okay, you play this. It says that if you reach this high, you get like 20% probability. If you reach a little more, then 50%. And this way, with multiple inputs, with a lot of rules, we can make a rule base which looks like randomized from outside. But actually there are a lot of rules inside, and we can play with the weights, the balance, and that's that way we can should teach or something the AI that what we want to do with him, and it's try to match with our music what we are playing. So it's a real-time cooperation between computer and human actors.
It's interactive with what you're
Yes.
playing. What was it that drew you into algorithmic and generative music to begin with. So what sort of spawned that interest in you?
Yeah, so I was many years ago. So I was, I think, 13 years old, and I used to skip school and just go and explore things. And I used to live in a quite small city in order not to be called by any members of my family or friends of my mom. I used to go to other city, just take a train. So there was one music store I used to go, and it was like, I think, mid 90s. I used to go quite often, and one of the CDs I picked up was Legendaire by Yannis Xenakis, and I remember the shock of listening to this opening section, which lasts like 2 minutes, which is just high frequencies, kind of blipping material. And I remember listening to only this 2 minutes for so many times, never listened to the rest of the piece. I loved it so much.
When you're working with computers, everything is quantized. It's, you know, it's very set, and I find often that it's always the mistakes, the serendipitous things that are the, not necessarily mistakes, but serendipitous things that can be the most interesting. So having that window of randomness to allow these weird little occurrences to come through is kind of important. And I guess that's the whole fun of creating something that's, sure, it's bound by a set of laws, but the laws are plastic enough and flexible enough that they do allow for this playfulness, like, you know, yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, that's what makes it interesting, I guess. You're always all these little surprises and stuff like that. You keep you on your toes.
So I think that was the kind of first moment when I started being really fascinated by this sort of music, you know, which wasn't rhythm based. You couldn't dance to it. It was just something from different worlds. You know, I kind of felt like I'm listening music from a different planet.
Yeah, I'm a computer engineer. Actually, we try to automatize all the things, and yes, sometimes if you start to do music in your spare time and you think, maybe I should script that.
And gradually I started thinking that, you know, I would like to compose some stuff myself using computer. So like that time I used some commercially available software to generate different sort of material and play with it.
But yeah, it's interesting that it gets in the highlight, it gets mainstream to create generative music. It has its place. It's like the Eno album that you listen to. You do your work and you need some ambient music, and the generative approach is quite useful for that.
Machines other than computers can also be used to create generative music. The person who coined the term generative music was Brian Eno, and one of the examples of machines like this that create generative music that he gave was the wind chime. So the structure, or the wind chime itself, is created by what we could call a composer, and then this will respond to some sort of parameter, in this case the wind, which will then create unpredictable music that has lots of aspects and follows a pattern that the composer didn't set out themselves. Analog electronics can also be used in the composition of noise music and used as a generative element of that type of music.
My name's Laurence. I'm an audiovisual artist specialising in glitch art.
What is it that draws you to the unpredictable nature of using glitch processes in your music?
I think especially in a live context, you always have something that's new, and it's as if you're riding a wave, you know. It's unpredictable and you just ride it out basically, you know.
How does it feel to perform a piece which is quite as abrasive and as noisy and so on?
I find it really exciting because it's really unpredictable. You can end up having really harsh noises that are really painful. which you can just alter, but sometimes you might have really blissful, smooth, ambient tones and textures, and sometimes you might have rhythmic beats arriving out of the system. For this particular piece, there's a loose arc structure, so it always begins with the ground hum and ends with the ground hum, and the visuals are synchronized similarly. So it starts off with monochrome, and in the middle it becomes extra colourful and saturated. Myself, I'm not very nihilistic, but I appreciate and recognise that there's a trope within the noise scene of nihilism and this kind of dreary black and white world. But myself, I don't really see it that way. It's kind of ironically inserted into the title, yeah. And also alludes to the infinite nothingness, because it's a no input system, the feedback. So to me, that is like infinite nothingness. As the title suggests, nothing is eternal.
Some composers choose to delegate certain compositional processes or elements of their compositional practice to other human beings. One way of doing this is to use graphic scores, which invites decision making to be done by the performer, or using verbal notation scores, which also offer quite a lot of freedom of choice for the performer as well.
How can I describe it as the sound of a plane before crashing? I am fairly sure I was not dreaming, and the only way I can begin to describe the incident in my own mind is that it was some sort of tremor, and then it passed. Was that a bomb going off? Was that a plane taking off? Was that thunder? A bomb in the distance? A distant train? Sleeping, lying, awoken by a vibrating house, mattress on floor.
The score is a combination of kind of ancient technologies or ancient processes in terms of it being a piece of Caithness stone, which is, extremely old now. Actually, I can't remember how old it is, and it's it's ancient. It's compressed mud, so there's fossil life in it. It's a kind of story in and of itself is that stone.
I think, just to pick up on it, the generative parts of the musical process were, as you've defined them, were absolutely fundamental to what we were doing. So each musician was making an in-the-moment, real-time decision about what to play. Although they were free to play whatever they wanted, they were restricting their choices so that they were using the graphic, the acoustic in the space, the other people in the space, was also influencing the kind of narrative arc of the piece and the way in which each individual section was constructed. So that those spontaneous generative decisions that the musicians were making based upon the graphic was absolutely crucial to the way in which the piece sounded. Essentially, it's primarily a collaboration between me and Alyn, but the musicians that we work with are also making composerly decisions. And I think this is a really important point, and it's a political point as well, about the status of composition, about the status of performers, about the status of improvisation. It's challenging the hierarchies within musical performance as well, and challenging some of the hegemonies that exist within sort of the performative work too, where the composer sits at the top of the tree and the performers are near the bottom, the conductor somewhere in the middle. I guess what this piece is trying to do is challenge these hegemonies and say, well, we're all involved at some level at the composerly side of things, but also, once again, acknowledging that the bulk of the work was done by me, Alyn, and myself in developing the piece. I think challenging the sometimes very rigid hierarchies that exist in music. And these hierarchies have existed for decades, for hundreds of years, yet they inhibit, not only do they inhibit professional musicians, but they also inhibit lots of people who feel they're not musical.
It links to those sorts of list games where you either have to, I went to the shops and I bought a cabbage, I went to the shops and I bought a cabbage in a car or whatever, you have to remember, and it becomes harder to do. Or the tray game where you have a load of objects on a tray which are covered up and you have to try and remember them. So it's kind of testing your cognitive load in different ways. So in this piece it was very much about trying to create a situation where the players are challenged to remember associations, to form associations, to remember them, and then to work together to teach each other to reinforce them. So it's about trying to find strategies for memorising things, essentially, and there's a sonic result of that. So it plays out in sound as well as in the social interaction between the two players, I think. So, and I think that's similar to how for me games work sometimes. And it's a natural parallel, I suppose, with the sorts of rules that happen in algorithmic rule-based compositions, and most analog board games involve rules which you internalise as a player. So you have to learn the rules, understand them, and then articulate them. Although it's in a sense it's an algorithmic composition, it's mostly about how people respond to those kinds of constraints, I think, and make decisions in relation to the things that other people do. So you get this kind of interaction, which for me is a kind of an interesting social situation. I'm very, very happy with people laughing, I should say. My starting point is not to make a funny piece. I'm not doing it from that point of view. I am aware that there are things that might emerge from these pieces which are funny, and I'm very happy with that. But that's not my starting point. My starting point is the social process and the material, and the kind of, in a sense, the psychology of the piece as well, and how that unfolds. And like in many things, sometimes funny things happen, sometimes they don't. I can conceive of lots of these pieces where they're entirely deadpan and not in any way humorous whatsoever because of the choices people make. And again, that's another side of it. So perhaps people are playful. They want to explore the funnier side of things. Yeah, I mean, humour is important to me, but I think you can have both. I think you can have a serious kind of rigorous compositional process that deals with social situations, but it also generates humour, and that I'm very, very pleased that can happen.
I was fascinated by the range of opportunities that verbal notation scores afford the composer, and so I did compose a handful of my own.